Eleanor Ashby had not wanted to come to Thornfield House. She had said as much to her mother, twice, in the firm and measured voice she used when she meant something but expected to be ignored. She was ignored. Her trunk was packed for her. A carriage was arranged. And on a warm Tuesday morning in June of 1887, Eleanor found herself sitting across from her mother on a 4-hour journey to her aunt's estate in the countryside, watching the city disappear behind her, and feeling very little about any of it. She was 26 years old. In most of the rooms she entered, that number followed her like a second shadow. 26 and unmarried. 26 and, in the opinion of her aunt, her mother's friends, and several women she had never spoken to, something close to a problem waiting to be solved. Eleanor did not think of herself as a problem. She thought of herself as a person who liked books and quiet mornings and conversations that meant something. She had turned down 2 proposals, one from a man who talked only about horses, and one from a man who talked mostly about himself. Neither had felt like a loss. Her mother disagreed strongly on both counts. Thornfield House in summer was beautiful in the way that wealthy places always are. Big, well-tended, and slightly exhausting. The gardens were perfect, the guests were plentiful, and at the center of everything, as usual, was Eleanor's cousin Cecily. Cecily was 23, recently engaged to a baronet's son, and possessed of the particular confidence that belongs to people who have never had any real reason to doubt themselves. She was not unkind in every moment, but she had a habit, a very old habit, of saying exactly what she thought about Eleanor in the voice of someone doing Eleanor a favor. The 2 of them had grown up this way, Cecily commenting, Eleanor enduring. It had always been treated as simply how things were between them, the way some families accept a leaking roof. It is uncomfortable, but it has been there so long that no one moves to fix it. The garden party was on the 3rd afternoon. The women wore light dresses and carried small glasses of lemonade and talked about engagements and the coming season. Eleanor stood near the far garden wall, a little apart from the rest, watching a bee work its way through a rose bush. She was not unhappy. She was simply alone, which was not the same thing, though the other guests seemed to find it difficult to tell the difference. Cecily found her there. She arrived with 2 of her friends, all 3 of them flushed from the heat and from laughter about something Eleanor had not heard. Cecily looked at her cousin, at the plain dress, at the lack of a companion, at the comfortable solitude that she had never quite understood, and she smiled the way she sometimes did, with her mouth but not particularly with her eyes. Eleanor, she said, standing alone again. I like it here, Eleanor said. Cecily tilted her head. Her friends were listening, which was perhaps the point. Do you know, she said, I was just saying to Mother that we really must find you someone. It is getting rather, well, she laughed softly, as though she was being gentle. Who would ever marry you, Eleanor, truly, at this point? The laughter that followed was small and light, the kind that is meant to pass quickly. Cecily moved on a moment later, taking her friends with her, back toward the bright center of the party. Eleanor did not move. She kept her eyes on the rose bush. The bee was still working. The sun was still warm. The words sat in her chest like something swallowed wrong. She did not know, she could not have known, that approximately 10 feet to her left, half hidden by the tall green hedgerow that ran along the garden wall, a man was standing with a glass of lemonade he had mostly forgotten about. James Wentworth, the Duke of Carrow, was 31 years old. He had come to Thornfield House because his mother had asked him to, and because he had learned, over the years, that some arguments were not worth having. He was not interested in the party. He had been on his way back inside when he heard the voice, Cecily's voice, carrying clearly in the still afternoon air, and had stopped. He had heard all of it. He stood very still for a moment after Cecily walked away. Then he looked at Eleanor. She was facing the garden, her back mostly to him, her shoulders very straight. There was something in that straightness, not pride exactly, but something quieter and more difficult. The posture of a person who has decided not to show that something hurt. He thought about walking away. He was good at walking away from things that were not his concern. He did not walk away. That was poorly done, he said. Eleanor turned. She had not known anyone was there. She looked at him, at the tall, plainly dressed man with the forgotten lemonade, and she did not immediately know who he was. That in itself was unusual. Most people knew who James Wentworth was the moment they saw him. Eleanor had simply not been paying attention to arrivals. Yes, she said after a moment. It was. He nodded, as though she had confirmed something. Then he looked back at the garden, the same way she had been looking at it, and they stood there for a moment, in the kind of silence that, strangely, did not feel uncomfortable. I am James Wentworth, he said. She told him her name. He said he knew. She asked how. He said her aunt had mentioned her. She asked what her aunt had said. He thought about it honestly and said that you were very well read and very difficult to introduce to people. Eleanor almost smiled. That is accurate. He came back the next morning. She was in the library, which surprised no one who knew her and surprised him not at all, given what he had been told. He knocked at the open door with his knuckles and held up a book he had found in his room. It was a novel she had mentioned, briefly, the afternoon before. He had not read it. He wanted to know if it was worth the time. She told him it was, if he had patience for a slow beginning. He said he generally did. He came in and sat down, and they talked about books for an hour, not about who had read the most or who had the better opinion, but in the way that people talk when they are genuinely interested in what the other person thinks. It was, Eleanor realized afterward, the best conversation she had had in some time. He came back the day after that, and the day after that. He was not what she would have imagined, if she had thought to imagine a duke at all. He was not smooth or particularly charming. He forgot things. He arrived late on Tuesday and did not apologize very convincingly. He disagreed with her about one of her favorite authors, and refused to back down even when she made what she privately considered an excellent argument. He laughed at things she said that she had not entirely meant to be funny. Eleanor's aunt watched all of this from across rooms and through windows and from behind conversations she was pretending to have with other people. She was quietly beside herself. Cecily watched too. Her expression, when she thought no one was looking, was harder to read. Something had shifted in it. The easy certainty replaced with something more careful. She said nothing to Eleanor directly. She did not come near the garden wall again. Eleanor noticed. She chose not to think about it too hard. What she thought about, in the quiet of her room at night, was that she kept waiting for James Wentworth to reveal the part of this that made sense as a story. The part where he was being kind to her out of pity. The part where this was a brief, well-meaning distraction and nothing more. She was watching for it the way you watch for a step you know is coming loose. Carefully, without wanting to find it. It did not come. On the 9th day, they were walking along the far edge of the property, past the hedgerow and the rose bushes, and he stopped. He had been quieter that afternoon than usual. She had noticed, but had not pressed him, because she understood the value of not being pressed. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to know, I am telling you because I think you should know it, not because I am trying to make you feel anything in particular." She waited. "I heard what your cousin said to you," he said. "In the garden. On the first afternoon. I was standing behind the hedgerow and I heard all of it." He said it plainly, without performing emotion around it. "I am sorry you had to hear it. I am sorry no one else said so at the time." Eleanor looked at him. The afternoon was very still. Somewhere in the rose bushes a bird was moving through the branches. She had expected, if this ever came up, to feel embarrassed. She felt something else instead. She felt seen, not pitied, seen. There is a difference, and it is not a small one. James Wentworth had been standing in that garden and had watched something happen to her, and he had not looked away, and he had not pretended it away, and now, 9 days later, he was simply telling her the truth. "Thank you," she said, which seemed small for what she meant, but it was the most honest thing available to her. He nodded. They walked on. The bird continued moving through the branches. 3 days later it rained, and they were both in the library again. James had finally finished the novel she had recommended. He thought the slow beginning was worth it, which she found quietly satisfying. He had borrowed another book. He had, in total, borrowed 4 books over 2 weeks and returned none of them, and he was sitting across from her with it open in his lap. He was not reading. He was looking at her. "I have a question," he said. "You usually do," she said. "This one is different from the others." She looked up from her own book. He was sitting in the same easy, slightly informal way he always sat, as though the rules about posture had never quite applied to him. He had the borrowed book in one hand. "Would you consider marrying me?" he said. It was so plainly put that, for a moment, she thought she had misheard him. She looked at him very carefully. He was not performing anything, not nervousness, not confidence, not the particular theater that proposals usually involved. He was simply asking, the way you ask something you mean. "I am asking," he said, "because I think we are well suited. Because I enjoy talking to you more than I enjoy talking to nearly anyone. Because I think you are remarkable in ways that the people in your life have done a poor job of noticing. And because," he paused here, just briefly, "I would like very much to keep returning borrowed books." Eleanor looked at her hands, then at the window. The rain was soft and even against the glass. She had been afraid of this, not of him, but of what came with him, of being wrong, of discovering 6 months later that the careful attention had been temporary, of the particular loneliness of being known by someone and then not known. But she looked at him. at the honest and slightly impatient expression on his face, and she thought, this is someone who told me what he saw in a garden when he did not have to. This is someone who came back, day after day, without being asked. Yes, she said. I would consider it. Is that a yes? He asked. Yes, she said. That is a yes. The announcement spread through the county within a week. It moved through drawing rooms and dinner tables and morning calls the way news always moves in small communities. Fast, slightly distorted, and with everyone adding their own meaning to it. Cecily's response was something to watch, if you were watching. She smiled and nodded at the announcement. She said all the right things. She called it wonderful news, and said she had always thought Eleanor had a great many qualities that people simply needed time to appreciate. She congratulated their aunt. She congratulated James's mother, who had arrived for a visit and found the situation entirely to her satisfaction. She did not congratulate Eleanor. Not directly, not once. Eleanor noticed, and then she did something that surprised even herself. She let it go. Not because it did not matter, but because she realized, standing in her aunt's drawing room, that Cecily's opinion of her had ceased to be the thing she was organizing her feelings around. It had been, for so many years, a kind of gravity, something she was either fighting against or falling toward, and now it simply wasn't. She felt the loss of that, in a small way. It is strange to put down something you have been carrying for a long time, even if the thing was heavy and never yours to carry in the first place. She stood in the drawing room and felt the particular lightness of it, and did not quite know what to do with her hands. James found her there, a little apart from the congratulations and the noise. He stood beside her and said nothing for a moment, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about him. She did not speak to me, Eleanor said, not accusingly. Just as an observation. No, he said. Does that surprise you? He considered it seriously. People like your cousin always land on their feet, he said. She will be fine. She will go home and rearrange the story until she is comfortable in it again. Eleanor thought about this. And what is the story, in her version? Probably that she saw something in you that others missed, he said, and that she is glad it worked out. Eleanor almost laughed. That is remarkably generous of you. It is not generosity, he said. It is just how people are. They married in October, small ceremony, the kind her aunt considered insufficient and James considered correct. The church was old and cool. The flowers were simple, and it was over in under an hour. Eleanor wore her mother's ring and thought, briefly, of the garden in June, of a bee working through a rose bush, of the afternoon something was said that was not meant to be survived. She survived it. They settled into a life that was, by the standards of the time, unremarkable. They lived in James's house in the country, which was large and somewhat cold in the winters and full of borrowed books. They argued about literature. They walked in the mornings. He was late often and unapologetic about it rarely, and she learned the difference. She was quiet sometimes in ways that worried him, until he understood that the quiet was not unhappiness, and then he stopped worrying. They wrote letters to their families. Eleanor wrote to her aunt and to her mother, and at Christmas, every year, she sent a gift to Cecily. It was never a grand gift, a small box of something pleasant, tea, once, a printed handkerchief another year, nothing that required a particular response. James asked her about it, the second year. Why do you send it? He said. You don't have to. I know, Eleanor said. Then why? She folded the wrapping paper carefully before she answered. Because I can, she said. Because every year she has to open it, and every year she has to decide how to feel about it. And every year I already know how I feel, which is fine. She set the package down. It is not unkind, it is simply honest. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, the real one, which was quieter than people expected and arrived slowly. You are somewhat extraordinary, he said. You are extremely late noticing, she said. Cecily received the gift every year. She sent a brief, polite note in return. Eleanor read each note once and did not save them. What she did save, what she wrote down, years later, in the small journal she kept on the table beside her bed, was this, that the worst thing that ever happened to her in a garden had also, in its strange and sideways way, become the beginning of the best part of her life. Not because being hurt led to being found, though it did, but because the moment she was most invisible to everyone around her, one person had simply refused to look away. That, she wrote, is its own kind of luck. She capped the pen, closed the journal, and went to find her husband, who was almost certainly in the library with a book he had borrowed from someone and had no intention of returning. She was right. She usually was. She, based on true events,